Today's recipe is a roasted vegetable medley pasta. The focus of today's recipe is gelatinisation. It's looking at the science behind the flour as we do the carbohydrates module, but the recipe itself also supports the vitamins and minerals module, which we'll be moving on to because it's got a very high content in water-soluble vitamins through the vegetables that we are using. So first part of the recipe is just about roasting and caramelising those vegetables so that they start to release those intrinsic sugars that we've talked about, and that they can then add a real sweetness to the dish. It is a vegetarian dish. Obviously very easily you can add in meat to it. It's just for this particular lesson that we're not going to be doing any meat, but fully adaptable. And again with the vegetables, very similar. I have just literally grabbed what I've got in the fridge to put in. So I'm using a pepper, a sweet potato, onion and courgette, but you could put mushrooms into there, you could put other ingredients, you could use spring onions, you could use a white onion, lots and lots of different things. Aubergines can go in there as well, so lots of different roasted vegetables can be added in. You can even do carrots. All of the vegetables can be roasted together and then obviously they are stirred into the dish. So I'm going to prepare all these vegetables first of all. Once they've been prepared, I'll show you how we prepare them on the roasting dish and then roast them. Whilst they're roasting, we're going to really focus on that gelatinisation, and I'm going to go through the process of the sauce making. So everything regards the vegetables is to be diced, but large, even sized dices. We don't want them too small so they burn in the oven. We want them to be quite large so that we can roast them. I'm going to start this now and I'll come back to you for the next stage. Now that the roasted vegetables have all been prepared, we've got a really good range of colours on there. So regarding the vitamin side, you're looking at eating a rainbow of fruit and vegetables on a daily basis. And that's just to ensure that you get a mixture of all the different nutrients. So you'll find that different fruits and different vegetables have different amounts of each of the vitamins. So by eating a rainbow of colours, you are getting a better distribution, especially of the water-soluble vitamins that we can't store in our body. So that is now prepared. I'm going to drizzle over some oil. So I'm using rapeseed oil. That's just got a higher burning content, so it is better for cooking with. Whereas if you're using an olive oil burns at a lower temperature, so it can actually ruin the flavour. Olive oil should really be used more for salad dressings and putting over salads and using cold. So I'm going to now put pepper over the top and some rock salt. Pop that over there so it's well seasoned, and that's going to go into a preheated oven at 200 degrees for about 25 minutes whilst we make the sauce. So I'm going to pop this into the oven and then we can move on to the gelatinisation process. For the next stage in the recipe, we're going to be focusing on gelatinisation and looking at the sauce making. One thing to remember when you are doing a coating consistency sauce, so the kind of sauce to coat pasta, to coat a meat for example, you would be using a 1:10 ratio. So we have 500 millilitres of milk here and we've got 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of butter. If we were doing a smaller quantity and doing 250, then you'd be looking at 25 and 25. So it's a really easy ratio to remember for a coating sauce. Obviously, if you want that sauce to be set, you'd use less liquid. If you want it to be a pouring, you'd use slightly more liquid. What we're going to be doing is getting the pasta on to cook. Whilst that is boiling and then simmering at the back, we'll start looking at the process of gelatinisation. But one thing to remember, gelatinisation is also occurring when we are cooking our pasta. That has starch molecules in it because pasta is obviously made from flour. And that will still go on through the same process. It will look at the temperatures, it will react to those temperatures, it will react to the warm water, it will absorb the warm water, and they will start to swell. And that's why the pasta almost doubles in size when you cook it, because it is taking on, those starch molecules are taking on the liquid, swelling with the heat so that we get full gelatinisation at boiling point, and that's how the pasta starts to cook. I'm going to pop the pasta on first of all, putting that into some water that's nearly at boiling point. Once that's boiling, I'll turn it down to a simmer just for safety, and I've got it on at the back of my hob. What I'm going to do with the ingredients in a moment is go onto a close-up so that you can see what's happening in the pan. I'm going to talk through the science of it, explain about the key temperatures and what's happening at those temperatures. But just to be aware of with flavours, we're going to do a cheese sauce. So your basic white bechamel sauce is your flour, your butter and your milk. We're adapting that by adding in cheese. Depending on the cheese you're using, you may want to add extra things in. So I'm using a mixture of double Gloucester mozzarella today. So it's quite a mild, creamy sauce. So I'm going to add some paprika in there. You could also add in cayenne pepper or dried mustard powder. Bear in mind with cheese, it's a high salt content. So you might not want to put too much salt in as a seasoning, but you can put lots of pepper into there. So cracked black pepper or some white pepper and stir that in will be absolutely fine. If you want to go with a stronger cheese, you can do a mature cheddar, you could add some parmesan into there. That would change the sauce, it will make a little bit more of a tang, and you may not want to then add extra ingredients as well. Completely up to you. Another thing to be aware of, lots of information, instead of milk, you can use a stock to make a basic gravy. You could also use wine, and you can make a white wine sauce, or you could make a red wine sauce in there as well. So lots of different options with the liquid to change the sauces. The process is still exactly the same with the gelatinisation. So the first step is to add in the butter. Now what I've done is I've just heated the pan up just to speed the process. What you've got to be very, very careful of with the butter is that you don't burn it. So we just want to melt this butter onto a medium heat without burning it. So if I just take the heat off for a second to allow that butter to be melted without any burning. Once that butter is melted and we have a liquid, as you can see in my pan now, we're going to add in the flour, and we're just going to remove it from the heat just for a second, just so we can combine that flour without the butter burning any at all. So once that's gone, you'll find very, very quickly your flour is absorbed into the butter, and you end up with what we call a roux. So you can see now, hopefully I've got it on the spoon, we've now got a paste. And we're just going to cook that out now just for a minute on the heat. And that will start to thicken because there is water in the butter. But we want to take this away from the heat to add the liquid in before we can actually start that full gelatinisation process. So now that this has been on the heat for about 30 seconds, it's really started to thicken and create this paste, we take it away from the heat and we add in the liquid. We don't add it all in at once. I'm going to add small amounts, and I'm going to go to using a whisk. The only time I would say not to use a whisk if you've got a coated pan. With a coated pan, the whisk and the reaction can scratch the bottom of your pan, so you are better using a plastic spoon. The reason we take it off the heat is just so that the process doesn't happen too quickly, so that we are in control. And we want to keep combining little bits of the milk in with what we call a roux, which is that butter and the flour mixed together. If you add it all at once, the likelihood is that that roux will float on the top and the milk will just be sitting underneath it, and you'll have lots and lots of lumps in your sauce. But by adding it in small amounts off the heat and really trying to combine them together in a controlled environment, you are less likely to have a lumpy sauce. You want to have a smooth sauce by the end of it. So I'm going through, and now it's starting to kind of go a little bit porridgey as the milk starts to thin out the sauce a little bit. Because it's not reaching any sort of high temperatures at the moment, the gelatinisation isn't actually happening. All we're doing is blending that liquid in with the butter and the flour, with that roux that I've just made, just so that it's all prepared and ready to start thickening when I have put it back on the heat. By doing it this way, we are getting no lumps. So we're nearly done now with the milk, and we want to pop all that milk in and trust the ratio, because it is a science. That ratio will happen. By putting the heat on, we will get that really thick pouring sauce. The problem the way I'm doing it now is some people think, oh, that sauce is thick, I'm going to stop putting the milk in and it is done. That flour is not cooked out yet, so all you will taste in the sauce is flour, and it won't be the thickness that you actually want it. It won't have that glossy look to it. So you can see now I have a lump-free, very watery, if I move the pan around you can see, very, very watery sauce. Now I'm going to pop it back on the heat. The biggest thing to remember as I'm doing this now is to not just stir in the middle, but to go all the way around the outside. That whole bottom of that pan is now conducting heat upwards and starting to transfer that heat onto the food. So all areas of that base of that pan have got the ability to thicken and gelatinize that starch. So we've got to do lots and lots of movement. Now, whilst I stand here and whisk this, I'm just going to talk you through what's happening in the pan. So the water or liquid that's in there, the milk in this case, when it gets to about 60 degrees, it's going to start absorbing that water and the starch will start to swell. So it's a little bit like blowing a balloon up. So the more heat we apply, the more, it's like putting more air in the balloon. It's going bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's taking on more and more liquid. And that's when it starts to thicken. So there's less room for those granules to move around. So as they get bigger and bigger, the space is staying the same. They're getting bigger and bigger, and that's what causes that thickness. So it's really important to keep stirring it regularly to prevent all those starch molecules staying at the bottom, and actually making sure that it's consistently stirred so that we prevent those lumps. We don't want a lumpy textured sauce. Just going to turn my pasta down now that it's boiling. When it gets to about 80 degrees, the starch granules are so swollen that they can't go anywhere else. And what happens is they start to burst. So it's a bit like popping a balloon, and maybe if you filled it with confetti, with coming through and it all spreading out everywhere, and it's releasing those starch molecules into the rest of the liquid that's left, and that's what starts to thicken it. So it's basically forming a three-dimensional network. Lots and lots of water molecules are all trapped within those starch molecules and stops them from moving around. So we have to ensure that this sauce is at boiling point, just so that we know that every single one of those starch molecules has fully gelatinized. So at 80, they start to burst. At 60 is when they start to absorb. But at 100, we know that full gelatinization has taken place, and that sauce is then ready to pour out or serve. So if you leave it to cool down, they'll start to thicken and they'll get longer chains, and the water molecules stay trapped inside, so the sauce actually goes thicker as it cools. So if you make a sauce and leave it till later, come back and it's really, really jelly-like, that's absolutely fine. That's normal. That's what should happen. It cools. As it cools, it does thicken even more. If you heat it up, it will come back, so don't worry too much about that. So obviously we've got the gelatinization going on in here with the pasta. So the pasta at the moment is taking on some of that moisture, and as it's being absorbed into the starch molecules within the pasta, and that's starting to thicken. We've got the gelatinization, as you can see, hopefully. There's a lot of steam at the moment. We've got there now lots and lots of bubbles. We have reached 100 degrees. It is fully boiling. And if we just take it away, you can see now it's a very glossy, smooth sauce that is ready to be either served as it is, or seasoned, or adding other ingredients. So what I'm going to do now is add about 2/3 of the cheese. We're going to reserve some to be topped on it when we make it as a pasta bake. So I'm going to put about 2/3 of the cheese on, and I'm going to remove it from the heat because that no longer needs heat just to melt that cheese. We're just going to stir it around and allow the core heat of the sauce to start to melt the cheese. I'm going to add in about 1/2 teaspoon of paprika to season it, as well as some pepper. And obviously I'm serving this for my children, so I'm not going to add in any extra salt in this evening because of the salt content in the cheese as well. And that sauce now, you can see, because I've used mozzarella, it's starting to go really, really stringy. That's that lovely, lovely stringy texture. Very, very smooth, got a nice gloss to it, all because I allowed all the combination to happen off the heat. If I'd have put it on the heat and tried to put the milk in, there's too much going on and you often feel a little bit out of control with it. So best to take it off the heat, get yourself fully prepared, and then have it ready. So what I'll do now, when the roasted vegetables are ready, I will take them out, show you how to combine everything, drain the pasta, and then we'll pop it underneath the grill, or you can put it in the oven just to gratinate at the end. Now that the vegetables are out of the oven, they are roasted. There's got lots and lots of sweetness come through with them. They've really maintained their colour as well. I'm going to first of all I've drained the pasta, and I'm going to put that into the sauce just to start with, so that all of that pasta gets coated in the cheese sauce. Just move that a sec. Once that's coated, we can then add in the roasted vegetables as well. Get them all in, and then we're going to pour them into a roasting tin or oven-proof dish, really, just so that it can either go back into the oven if you're making it in advance. If you're going to eat it almost straight away, you can add it under the grill, and you can just gratinate that cheese on top instead. So just push the roasted vegetables into the dish, get them all in, and then we're just going to really combine those together, not with a whisk. Stir them all around, and then we're going to add them into the dish in here, and we're going to top it with a little bit more cheese and then gratinate that underneath the grill, ready to be served as a dinner. But it's a really, really good recipe to introduce lots and lots of vegetables. As I said before, you can actually put meat into there as well if you wanted to, or you could serve it as a side and do with some grilled salmon. You could serve it with grilled chicken. You can put corn into it as well to increase the protein if you want it to be a vegetarian, or tofu. But what you're looking for is a really, really creamy sauce with lots and lots of vegetables in. And then adding that cheese over the top. We're going to pop that under the grill, and then I will have a photograph at the end so you can see the final product.